We have a short chapter about single sign-on or actual single sign-on coming up after we have covered LDAP. So bear with me, this is not a concrete instruction of how to install every single sign-on system, every single sign-on system, but it's just the overview over SSO providers in Liferay. When you look at the user interface in Liferay in control panel, server administration, you can find several single sign-on systems there. And while they are all named with a single name, you might as well find some which are compatible with something else. For example, the token-based, I think they're all summarized under SiteMinder, if I'm not mistaken. And we have Facebook sign-on, OpenID, CAS as one of the systems that is commonly installed. OpenSSO in there, NTLM, Google sign-on. So all of these systems are systems that you can find there. You can add additional plugins in there, for example, SAML, and we'll come to SAML a little bit later in one of the future slides here in the same chapter. What does that do for you? Well, basically it helps you authenticating to Liferay and to other systems without Liferay ever knowing your password or your chip card or your dongle with the 6-digit code. There is quite some overlap because typically whenever we use single sign-on, we also use LDAP. I've mentioned that in the previous chapter. Single sign-on solutions, they all have their own format and some of them are interchangeable. I didn't mention one of them, so we do support, previous slide again, we do support OpenSSO, which has been superseded by OpenAM, and OpenAM I'm always blanking on the version, has changed their implementation or their protocol. So OpenAM is no longer backward compatible with OpenSSO. However, I can at least assert you that the OpenAM integration is also being worked on. But just if you remember the old history of those projects, you might just assume we are OpenAM compatible. That's right, until a certain version. And then from the newer version on, we are not at the time of this recording, but I'm following the ticket where it's implemented and it is being implemented. And as far as I remember, currently in QA or review. So OpenAM will follow soon. Now, just a random rant in here. It might not fully fit into the DevOps chapter, but quite often I hear or I read some messages where somebody says, hey, I'm new to Liferay and I'll need to implement my own login, which makes me cringe because one of the features that you get with Liferay is quite a lot of the underlying infrastructure. So you get all of the identity management in there. You get all of the permissions and so on management, which means I think being a new user to Liferay or being new in the whole Liferay technology stack and implementing your own sign-in is just the wrong question. It doesn't fit together. There are opportunities or there are occasions where you actually need to implement something like that, or you might need to implement something, but it shouldn't by far be your very first goal, but it should be somewhere later in. Because after all, you have this platform with all the identity management in there. If you actually implement some custom login to Liferay, my suggestion is to look at the single sign-on interface, because that's a well-defined software interface. And in the end, as you can see here, this slide contains 7 lines, 7 different systems that are implemented already. And you can imagine where there are 7 systems implemented already, number 8, your personal custom proprietary system that you will need to implement as well, fits in quite well. System number 8 is always easier to implement than system number 2. So if there is any reason for implementing any custom login to Liferay, just look at the single sign-on interface. Okay, let's go further. There's one slide in here with SAML. SAML is one of the plugins that we provide to our enterprise customers. downloadable on Marketplace, and requires Liferay DXP, so this is not for the users of the Community Edition. SAML actually functions in two different ways. There is the so-called identity provider and there's the service provider. So with SAML, you can sign in with Liferay to an external system. So any SAML single sign-on implementation, you can offload your password comparison to. It will assert the identity to the actual to the actual portal, to Liferay. Liferay in that case will be a service provider, and any external SAML username password comparer, to say it lacking another word, will be the identity provider. Liferay's SAML implementation can also work the other way around. So you can run Liferay as your single sign-on system. So you can authenticate to Liferay, and Liferay will assert your identity to someone else. Works as well. Both ways work with our SAML plugin. And with the request response that happens between the service provider and the identity provider, we can even completely rule out the LDAP implementation, because the information we get from the SAML identity provider can contain everything we need. Only one single sign-on provider is supported per deployment. As far as I'm concerned, I always found the idea of multiple single sign-on providers a little bit weird. Apparently there are use cases for that, but in Liferay single sign-on, the single actually stands for single and not for some. SAML, Security Assertion Markup Language, is both a format and a protocol standard. For authentication, we'll just use it interchangeably for whatever. And in SAML, we have identity providers, which are the actual single sign-on systems, and service providers, which are the systems that use or that delegate single sign-on to somebody else. And Liferay can do either service and identity provider.